Hello, class. Now we're going to look at what is called the critical period from 1783 to 1789, where we're looking at the shaping of the U.S. government. So remember that the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783 and it ended the Revolutionary War and recognized American independence. Americans feared a tyranny. This fear will influence their decisions while creating a new government. Basically, they feared having one leader or absolute monarch. So let's look at the foundations of our government and how the founding fathers created our government. The government that emerged from the revolution had many influences. We looked at ancient influences such as direct democracy, where citizens have a say in government through voting. They directly vote versus electing somebody to vote for them. In ancient Greece, however, they used what was called a representative democracy, where citizens elect representatives to act on their behalf, in which we do today when we elect the president, senators, and House of Representatives. That is representative democracy. And that was in ancient Rome. Where do we get a lot of our ideals from to have a democracy? Well, it begins with the Enlightenment period that you should have studied last year. The Enlightenment was 1700s thought in Europe that focused reason and logic rather than religious thought. And three of the Enlightenment philosophers that had a huge impact on our government is John Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu. John Locke believed that men are born with natural rights, and these natural rights are life, liberty, and property, and that no government can take those rights. Rousseau believed that a social contract existed between man and government, and when it's broken, such as when the natural rights are violated, people have a right to leave or to break away from that government. And Montesquieu, to make sure that the power is fair and divided and you don't get an absolute monarch, he said, look, you should divide the power between three branches versus one branch. So government should be divided in a government in more than one branch, and that will make sure that each branch checks each other, and then you won't have an absolute monarch, in which we do today. We have three branches of government. So our first government that we created was called the Articles of Confederation. The Continental Congress adopted the Articles of Confederation. It was the first constitution of the United States in 1777. The Articles of Confederation were not ratified or approved by all 13 states until 1781. It took a while. The Articles of Confederation created a loose confederacy of sovereign states and a weak central government. Anytime you see central, you're talking about federal government. So it created a weak central government. Most of the power was given to the state governments because, again, they feared having an absolute monarch. These articles had several weaknesses. They had no standing army, so inability to deal with conflict. They had no power to tax, so Congress is in debt from the war, but could not raise money to pay individuals back. There was no single currency between the states. So the states created currency. So if you go to Virginia, Virginia will have their dollar bill will look different than North Carolina dollar bill look. So where it says no single currency between states, states goes right after between states. Sorry about that. There was no executive leadership, meaning there was no strong leader. So they had a lot of indecision. There was equal state had equal vote in Congress. Small states had the same power as large. Could only change the Constitution with unanimous vote, meaning all 13 had to agree. So there was an inability to correct problems of the articles. Looking at Shays' Rebellion is going to be the final straw. Daniel Shay, a Revolutionary War veteran, was a farmer in Massachusetts. Many farmers in New England farms were foreclosed, meaning taken away because they could not pay their debt. Massachusetts raised taxes to attempt to pay its war debt. An armed uprising to stop courts from moving forward with foreclosures became known as Shays' Rebellion because they were taxing the farmers heavily, and the farmers did not agree with it. Again, you have a whole nother taxation issue. The rebellion was stopped by state militia, but It proved to many that the Confederation was too weak, could not raise an army to deal with such crisis. So it was basically a weak government. The Northwest Ordinance provided a plan to admit 5 new states from the Northwest Territory, and that's land between Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Sorry. When territory had more than 60,000 people, it could petition for statehood. The Northwest Ordinance outlawed slavery in these states and guaranteed rights to the citizens there. It also called for decent treatment of Native Americans. So it was a nice area to live in if you wanted to move because you didn't have slavery, and it said fair treatment to the Native Americans. Once they realized that the Articles of Confederation was too weak and Shays' Rebellion took place, they was like, look, we need to come together and we need to meet again. And this was called the Constitutional Convention. It was a secret meeting. It was top secret. Because just imagine if you knew that our government was meeting now to change the government. It would cause chaos. So nobody told anyone that they were going to change or basically revise the articles. So in September of 1787, the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia to address the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, which again was a weak central government. Some familiar faces there was George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison. George Washington, respected Revolutionary War hero, was chosen to lead the convention. During the convention, you're going to have a divide. You're going to have Federalists versus anti-Federalists. The pro-Constitution, and these people wanted for the Constitution to be passed. They wanted a strong federal government. You're going to have James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. When you see central government, again, they wanted a strong federal government to deal with problems the Articles could not handle. The Bill of Rights, they didn't see a need for a Bill of Rights because they felt like the government would not abuse its power. And they felt like they should have a president and the president should have more power. Who supported the Federalists? It was made up of wealthy industrialists, so people that had money. The anti-Federalists who opposed it is Patrick Henry and Samuel Adams, the leader of the Sons of Liberty. Patrick Henry is the individual who said, give me liberty or give me death. They wanted a weak central government, power to rest in the states. And they felt like it needed to be a Bill of Rights, and it was essential to make sure that the government did not abuse its power. As far as for the power of the president, they wanted it to be very limited because they feared of kings and tyrants. And who supported the anti-Federalists was the commoners and farmers. During the convention, several compromises was made to try to make everyone happy. So the big issue is dividing the nation was how representation in Congress will be decided. You're going to have two plans be presented. You're going to have what is called the Virginia plan, which was for the bigger states. The bigger states wanted this plan. It called for representation to be based on state population. This pleased the large states because, again, they're going to have more people living there. Then you're going to have the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise created a bicameral legislature, meaning two houses. The House of Representatives will be based on state population, and the Senate will have equal representation, 2 senators per state. Well, the smaller states did not like this plan, so they created their own plan, and this is called the New Jersey plan. They called for equal representation in Congress. This pleased small states who feared losing power, and this is small states, add a T. Another issue, when you look at representation, how are you going to count the slaves in the South? So the Great Compromise is going to pass. They combined it, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, by creating a 2-house legislature, the upper house being 2 senators per state that made the smaller states happy. The lower house being based on population made the larger states happy. But now we're looking at, okay, now you have North versus South. How are we going to count the slaves? Because then the South will have more representation in the lower house because it's based on population. And the Northerners did not like this. So the Southern states wanted slaves to be counted as people when determining representation in the House of Representatives. The Northern states did not want slaves counted when determining representation in the House of Reps. So the 3/5 compromise stated that slaves will be counted as 3/5 a person. So for every 5 slaves, they will be counted as 3. The Constitution takes no steps to address the problem of slavery. Any meaningful attempts to restrict slavery will result in no Southern support for the Constitution. And they needed the Southern states to agree. So slaves were restricted from being imported in the U.S. in 1808. That's the only thing they could agree on, that they will stop participating in the slave trade. So how do we get this document to be approved? It was required that the Constitution be ratified or approved by 9 of 13 states for it to go into effect. The Anti-Federalists complained about a lack of Bill of Rights. The Federalists promised a Bill of Rights to get their support. Delaware was first to ratify, with other states following. North Carolina ratified when a Bill of Rights was proposed. Rhode Island, which did not want to be the only state to reject the Constitution, ratified in 1790. The Constitution created 3 branches in the U.S. government. This comes from Montesquieu. The executive branch to enforce laws, the legislative branch made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives to make laws, and the judicial branch to evaluate laws, and the head of this branch is the Supreme Court. So what are the Bill of Rights? The Bill of Rights are the first 10 of the 27 amendments that we have. The Constitution was very flexible as it allowed changes. So right away, before the Constitution was even signed, we already had changes made, and those are the Bill of Rights. They put specific limits on government's power to protect the rights and liberty of citizens. They were written by James Madison. So the Bill of Rights include the First Amendment, protection for freedoms of speech, religion, petitions, assembly. The right to bear arms, which means you have a right to own a gun as long as you have a permit. Number 3, protection from quartering soldiers during peacetime, meaning that military cannot just come in our house and live and eat. Protection from unreasonable search and seizures. They need a search warrant. 4, 5, 6, and 8 are your rights of accused amendments. So rights in criminal cases, right to a fair trial, protection against cruel and unusual punishment. People use this when they go to court. And then number 7 is just protection in civil cases, like when you're being sued. After the Constitution is signed, they do pick our first president, and our first president is going to be George Washington. He was a natural choice because he was the leader that helped us win the American Revolution. John Adams was the runner-up. He was named his first president. Washington was sworn in at Federal Hall in New York City. At the time, this was the capital, in April 1789. Washington would set many precedents as the first president. This includes establishing a cabinet to advise the president. He is going to be the one that only does 2-term presidency, meaning 2 4-year terms, totaling 8. He creates the title of Mr. President, and he also does a farewell address. That concludes this lecture video.